This program is brought to you by 3CTV. Like what you learned? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up on the latest 3CTV programs.
Hi, I'm Lynn Mann, presenting to you Microsoft Excel 2010 Exploring Data Tools. Most users of Microsoft Excel 2010 know that it is a powerful calculation machine, able to build tables and charts, utilize hundreds of built-in functions, so that, in essence, Excel will do the math for us. But not everyone knows about the wonderful data tools, which has the ability to validate entries, find solutions to problems, solve multiple ways of analyzing data, and to manipulate our data. One of the useful data tools Microsoft Excel 2010 has to manipulate data is Consolidate. Consolidate will merge and summarize data on a separate source worksheet and consolidate the data into one master worksheet. The source worksheets can be in the same workbook as the master worksheet or in different workbooks. When you consolidate data in one worksheet, you can more easily update and aggregate it on a regular or ad hoc basis. Let's take a look at consolidating from multiple workbooks. Currently, I have 5 workbooks I'd like to work with, and it happens all of them are open. So on the View tab, in the Arrange All, I want to tile all of my open windows. And you'll see I have my master file, and then I have North Flats, South Shore, West Coast, and East Hills. Let's say I own a business, Click and Flash. And these are my store locations. And I'd like to consolidate all of the data for their second quarter into one business second quarter. So I can do that with Consolidate. So the first thing I want to do is click on Data, Consolidate. And what I want to do is, before I do that, let me close this out, and I do want to put my cursor where I want to start the Consolidate in my master file. Consolidate. Right now the function is sum, which means add up all of the data that I'm going to tell you to add up. I could count it, take an average, a max, a min, but I want to add it up. So we'll say sum. But I do need to tell what is it that it needs to go get. So the reference, when you have all of your workbooks open, this is the easiest way I found to do it. I'm going to go and click on the areas that I want to add up. So service all the way through total. And I say add it. Here's the key of Consolidate. All of my workbooks must be set up the same, meaning I have to have the same labels and the same information in essence in there. So I have service, developing, enlarging, service, developing, enlarging, service, developing, enlarging. And it's set up even if there is no data like transfer media, they are all set up the same, so Consolidate will work. So I grab North Flats. Now I'm going to grab South Shore and add. And it's grabbing the whole entire reference as to where it is located. It just so happens to be located on my SkyDrive. I'm going to add it. And I'm going to add the 4th area to add up. Here is a key. I need to use the top row of the labels and the left column of the labels. And I want to create links with the source data. What that means is if the source data gets updated, my master file gets updated. So again, please remember to toggle the use labels in the top row and the left column so this will work correctly. And you say OK. And bingo, it is done. That's how fast Consolidate works. So you might ask, why did I get an extra column? So let me just expand my master file here. My labels are in A, and then my April, May, June is in C, D, and E. But what is this B column? Well, here's the secret about Consolidate. Those are the labels of where the data came from. Right now, we can see kind of the subtotal level. But if I expand Right now I'm at 1. If I expand to 2, you'll see, oh, East Hills had 523, North Flats had 523, West Coast had $1,400. So the total developing was $33.98. So on and so forth. So I can expand it to get the details of my consolidated information. If I don't want to see the details, I can go back to the first level. I can even scrunch down B. That's one way of doing it, using it multiple workbooks and bring it into one workbook. But if this was in one workbook, I could have grabbed it off of different worksheets. So let's try that. So now let's consolidate our data, which is in the same workbook. So we have where I'm going to consolidate it. I have West Coast, South Shore, East Hills, and North Flats. This time, here's a little bit of a difference. I've already named this range from A2 to E12. I named this North. Okay? And then I can name this range East. On the South, I named it South. And on the West Coast, I named it West. Why did I do that? Now, when I go to consolidate my data, I go to Data, Consolidate, and let's say I'm going to take the average this time, and my reference is going to be North, South, East, every time I'm adding it, and West. I'm going to say the rows use the labels in top row and left column, and again create the links, and I say OK. And here we go. And again, I get that nice extra column because if I need to see the details, I can see the details. The only difference is it gives me the working file name, so the file name versus instead of the tab names. So it's a little less easily read this way. But you could change it. You could say North and leave it that, and South and East and West, and you can rename it. Let's review. Consolidate can merge and summarize data from multiple workbooks sheets and from one workbook sheet to the next. We applied Consolidate to our data using the location and different workbooks, and we applied Consolidate using our data using the named ranges in the same workbook. Microsoft Excel 2010 has a data tool called Data Validation, which can ensure that correct data is entered and stored in a worksheet. With data validation rules, we can limit what information is permitted to be entered. The rules can be based on a value, list, formula, date, time, text length, or even a custom build restriction. Let's see a few of these in action. I'd like to build a spreadsheet of my movie collection. I'll set up my sheet quickly with a few column headings, a few movie titles and year of releases, and some formatting. Then I'll begin to add data validation rules. Data validation will allow me to enter data quickly by using drop-down menus, and also will limit the data that's permitted to be entered. The data purchase, I would like to put a data validation rule here. It really should be on or before today's date. So I'd like to put on the range of row 3 through 20, but I do know my movie collection will grow over time. So I'm going to go ahead and be on the safe side and select the whole entire column. Data, in the Data Tools group, Data Validation, I'm going to click on Data Validation. Currently, any value is allowed, but I want to restrict the date. So I'm going to say date. I do know the date should be on or before today, which would be less than or equal to. But here's the problem. If I actually put in today's date, then what happens when I come back to my worksheet a week from now and I put in next week's date? it will be invalid. So I need to be a little bit more clever here in putting in the date. Excel has a function called today, which will grab whatever today is, it will grab that date. So I'm going to use that formula or that function equal today in beginning parenthesis, in parenthesis. The next two tabs we should look at. One is an input message and the other is error alert, what happens when the error does happen. Input message is a helpful tip to the user. I think it's always good to give them a little bit of hint on what valid data these are. So I'm going to say date restriction, and it should be on or before today's date. And error alert, by default, it's going to stop me from putting in any value that's not valid. A warning will stop me, but then it will give me a choice to override the error or not. And then information is just an information item. It literally will say, hey, you put in some wrong information, but that's okie dokie. I think I'm going to set it to warning. I'm going to say date warning. Try and give it useful information here. And we'll say date is, in the future. And I'll say OK. Now, as soon as we click on any of the cells where the data validation has been placed, we do get that helpful hint of date restriction on or before today's date. So let's check it out. Let's say 6/5/2010, that's before today. That's valid. Today happens to be September 4th, 2013. So I'll try today's date. That's valid. Let's try tomorrow's date. I get my warning, date warning. The date is in the future. Do I want to continue, yes or no, or cancel? If I say yes, it will permit me to put in the date because remember, this is just a warning. If I say no, it will allow me to change the date. I'm going to say yes to go ahead and override it. It looks like my data validation is working just fine. Now, the second data validation that I would like to build is a drop-down list, which would be perfect in the genre column. I'd like to choose from a list of genres, and I don't want to have to type it in every time, so a drop-down list is perfect. So again, I'm going to select the column. I'm going to go to Data, Data Tools, Data Validation again, and instead of any value, I'm going to select List. And what is my source? Well, it's my list, so I'm going to say Action, Drama, Family, Musical, and that's good. I'm going to say OK. Now I didn't put an input message because I think it's pretty clear that it's a drop down and you should choose from a drop down. But let's say, oh, Action, Drama, Family, Musical. Let's say I'm down here on Patton, and that's really a war movie. So I'm going to type in war. I get my error, and it actually stops me. It will not let me put in anything besides using what's on the list. But war should be on the list. So I'm going to go back to data validation, open up my list, and I'm going to add war. So any changes I need to do in this data validation area. I'm going to say OK, and now when I go to Patton, I have war to choose from. Okay, let me put in a few more genres here. Action, Drama, War. Well, I actually need another one. I need maybe Dial In for Murder should be Thriller. I don't want to keep going back up to data validation. So here's a better way, in my opinion, to build a list. Off to the side here, off of my main information, I'm going to build my list. Now that I have my list, I'm going to go back to data validation. And, oops, I didn't select my whole entire column. It's data validation. List, instead of me typing it in, I'm going to go select where my data is. I'm just going to select my list here. And I'm actually going to select a few blanks, just so in case I can build maybe one on top and one on the bottom. And I'm going to say OK. Now, here's my whole list. And we'll say this one is adventure, I guess, and we'll keep going. But here's the thing. I missed out on action, so I'm going to type in action. And because that was originally blank, now it's immediately on my list. Likewise, I had that extra blank on the bottom. I can add junk, and my data validation is immediately updated. Okay? So let's say this is thriller. But I come back later on and I decide, oh, my list, I don't want thriller for whatever reason, and I move everything else up so it's nice and neat. I don't have thriller suspense on my list anymore, but thriller suspense is on my sheet. Why? I mean, it stopped me when I tried to put something in there that wasn't on the list before. Why is it there? Here's the thing. It was valid at the time that you put it on the list, but it's not valid right now, and we can test to see that it is valid or not. Data validation, circle invalid data. It does take a moment, but it will circle what data is valid and what data is not. It's at this point I can change it if I want and say it's now a drama. And let me go back to data validation, clear data validation circles, and let's try it again for data validation. Again, it does take a moment for Excel to find all of your data validations and circle any invalid data. It has circled genre because I have a data validation on that header, and data purchase, and I have one invalid data from data purchase, but I'm going to leave it there. The last data validation I'd like to show you is on a value. So let's say I want to limit my budget on purchasing any movies to $20, $0 to $20. So again, I'm going to highlight the whole column. Data, data tools, data validation, and this time any value is going to be a decimal because money is decimal. It's going to be between. The minimum is 0 for $0 and the maximum is 20 for $20. We should put an input message because it's not obvious. We'll say purchase limit max, $20. And error alert. This time I think I just want an information because I do realize some purchase prices will be above $20. Purchase limit, purchase info, over $20 purchase. Okay, I'm going to say OK. Now it says purchase limit max 20. Let's test this. Let's say $5. You may have asked, why did I say actually, why couldn't it just be less than or equal to 20? Well, what if I accidentally hit negative and I said 302? I want it to say that's an error because that really wouldn't be a valid value. I don't think somebody's going to pay you to take their movie off the hand, but maybe. Again, it was an information item, so I can just say OK and move on, but I will change it to a valid amount. Say $10, let's try $21. Again, purchase info over $20 purchase, and we're going to say OK. Let's review. Data validation allows us to set up rules and restrictions on the type of data that's entered in the cell. We applied a data validation rule on a date and value. We created a drop-down list, and we found Microsoft Excel's 2010 Goal Seek enables us to find an input value needed to achieve a certain goal or objective. In essence, we know what answer we want, but we're not too sure what value we need to make the result happen. Here's a very simple example. I live in a community with an HOA and we're permitted 3 animals. Currently, I own 2 animals. So I know I can have one more animal to make 3 animals. So on my Excel sheet, I literally have A4 plus B4 equals C4. So if I say, hey, I need 5 animals, the total is 7. Okay, that's great. But let's have Microsoft Excel's Goal Seek find out how many more animals we can have. So on the Data tab, in the What If analysis, we're going to click on Goal Seek. Right now, my set cell, which is my result cell, I want to set it to 3. I'm permitted 3 animals. By changing however many more animals I can have. Now we know the answer is 1. 2 plus 1 equals 3. Let's see if GoalSeek can figure that out. Hey, target value is 3, and it found 3. And it said, oh, if you set B4 to 1, you'll get the answer you want. Cool. Here's a little bit more difficult of a problem. We have an original price of some object of $30 and the discount of 10%, so we know we have to pay $27. But let's say I really want to pay $25. What would the discount have to be to pay $25? Well, I have GoalSeek, so in the What If analysis, GoalSeek, my set cell is what I want it to be, which is $25, by changing the discount. So I want to know what discount I have to make the price I pay $25. And GoalSeek found a solution. It's 17%. But I can do it another way. Let's say sales price, again, data, what if analysis, GoalSeek. I want it to be $25. Oops. Yes, $25. By not changing the discount this time, but by changing the original price, which is $30. How would I get $25 from there? And GoalSeek found a solution. The original price has to be $27.78 with a 10% discount to have the sales price of $25. So on that one, I showed you both by changing the discount we can find $25, or changing the original price we can find $21 or $25. Let's try one more example, a little bit more harder here. On my third example, I actually have trying to figure out the price of a house that I can quote unquote afford. My payment, if I start off with a house of $250,000 with a down payment of 20%, my loan amount is going to be 20% minus my original house payment, or the house cost is $200,000. My loan is going to be the typical 30 months. And let me explain something here. My term is really 360. It is not 360 months. I added the months by formatting it, just like the dollar sign is actually not here. It's just 250,000. That's formatting. This month is just a custom format. It's to make it easier to read. And then the interest rate, and by using the PMT function, Excel calculated the payment. So if I bought a house for $250,000 with a 20% down payment at 5% interest for 30 years, my house payment would be $1,073. But let's try and figure out what interest rate I would have to make my payment $900. So my result is going to be $900 payment. So GoalSeek will find it for us. The value is negative because it is a payment, negative 900. By changing what interest it could be, and I'm going to say OK. And GoalSeek immediately found a solution. The interest rate would have to be 3.52% to have a payment of $900. All right, cool. Let's cancel out of that and go to the original values. Let's see what down payment would have to be, down payment percentage would have to be for the payment to be $900. So again, what if analysis, GoalSeek, we're going to have negative 900 by changing this time the down payment percent. We're going to say, okay, we would have to have a 33% down payment to get at 5% interest for our loan payment to be $900. Here's what I want to show you, why it had to be negative. It is a payment. If I accidentally said goal seek, do a $900 payment, because it's cash, and I change, I don't know, interest rate, we're going to go and go and go, and it's going to say, hey, goal seek may not have found a solution. Well, it's pretty much impossible to have a positive that they would give you money for taking out a loan. That's why goal seek could not find a solution. If you run across that ever, try changing your value to a negative number, and I bet you anything you'd probably find your solution by changing interest rate, and bingo, it finds it. Even this example is relatively uncomplicated. So let me show you one more example that's a little bit more complicated from here. So let's pretend that we own a widget company and we have some fixed costs, we have some variable costs per unit, and the per unit cost is spread out over here. So if we make 100,000 units, then the variable cost per unit is 52 cents. If we have 200,000 units, it's 50 cents, so on and so forth, that these variable costs are very variable per unit. Widgets produced 500,000. Total cost is 1.4 million. Cost per unit, our markup price, and so our selling price is $4.37. So what's our profit? $727,000. Well, let us see how many units we would have to produce if we wanted to profit $750,000. All right, get out your scratch pad and figure that out. Remember that when you change the widgets produced, you've got to change the variable cost over here. That makes it more complicated. But with goal seek, all I need to do is say what profit I want. So under data, what if analysis, goal seek, my set sell is going to be $750,000 by changing however many widgets I produce. So I'm just going to click on widgets produced, and I'm going to see if goal seek can find the answer. And it's working on it. It found something. It may not have found a solution exact, but it's pretty darn close to what I was looking for. All right, let's cancel out of that. Let's try one more thing. Goal seek. Let's see if we can find $1 million profit by any chance. Ah, it found it very quickly because it's an exact amount. So if we produce 2.8 million widgets at the variable cost of 26, which if we scroll, we're going to say, okay, if we scroll down here, here's $1 million. It picked that up. We're going to be able to have the cost per unit is 69 cents, our selling price is 104, and we make a profit of $1 million. Now let's try one more example. I put back the widgets produced to $500,000. And we still want to make a profit of $1 million. What would our markup have to be? So again, let's use the power of goal seek and say our profit, we want it to set it to $1 million by changing our markup. And we're going to see, wow, goal seek found it immediately. Our markup would have to be 59%. Let's review. Goal seek is a what-if analysis tool that, given a result, finds the input we need to make that happen. We use goal seek in several different examples, some more complex than others. There are times goal seek can't find an exact solution. And the times that goal seek can't find a solution at all could possibly be. Microsoft Excel's 2010's data table is a way that users can see multiple results by using the what-if analysis of a single variable or two variables. What does that mean? Think of it like this. I have a function, maybe something like cats plus dogs equals total animals. And I want to know how many animals I have if I change the number of dogs. One variable. So I give Excel the formula to calculate the total animals, that's cats plus dogs, and then I give it a list of possible number of dogs. Remember, the number of cats aren't changing, just the number of dogs. Now, Excel 2010 takes each value for the number of dogs, plugs it into the formula, and spits out the result in a table for us to see. If I use the same example, but I change the number of cats and the number of dogs, then that's two variables, and Excel 2010 can do that also. Let's use Excel 2010's data table tool to find out what our car payment would be if we changed the length of the loan. Here on my sheet I have some information. Currently, the length of my loan is 60 months. The interest rate is 5.5. The car loan balance is $6,300, so my payment amount is $120.34. But I want to know what would my payment amount be if it was 48 months, 36 months, 24 months, or even 12 months. So we do need to set it up a little bit. So right now, right above the cell, right above 48 and one over to the right, I need to give it the formula I'm going to be using. Well, it's already on my sheet, so I'm just going to point to it. So equal the payment amount. The formula is already there, so it's going to grab that formula. And what it's going to do as a data table is basically what it's going to say is take 48, stick it right here in the number of months, figure out what the payment amount is, and show it right next to 48. Likewise with 36, put it in where 60 is, figure out the payment, put it on our table. 24, put it in where 60 is, find the payment, place it in the table. And likewise with 12. So to do that, I highlight this area, one above the 48, the formula all the way down to the bottom. I go up to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. Row input cells is if I have two variables, or if I set this up where 48 was horizontal. 48, 36, 24, 12, I would use row input cell. But this time I'm going to use a column because the 48, 36, 24, and 12 is in a column. And where is that going to be put? Where the 60 is. Remember, it's going to take 48, put it where 60, spit out the payment amount. We're going to say OK. And immediately I can find out that if my loan was 48 months, my payment would be $146.52. If it was 12 months, it would be $540.77. Let's try another example. This time, let's say we're a business and we had the sales in 2013 of $650,000, and we expect a growth of in 2014 of 2.10%. So our projected sales would be $663,650. But what if we want to figure it out for 1%, 1.25%, 1.50%? That's a perfect thing for a data table. So again, right up here, I do need to one cell up, one cell over to the right. I do need to point it to the formula that it's figuring out. So I just point it to the cell with the answer of projected sales. I highlight where I want my table. I go up to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. And again, this is set up in a column. So it's not going to be row input cells. It's going to be column input cell. And where is this going? This 1% is going to replace the 2.10. The 1.25 is going to replace 2.10. So the column input cell is going to be right now 2.10%. So again, it's going to put the 1%, the 150, the 175, and keep doing that, spitting out the formula each time, and we say OK. And immediately we can see, let's spread it out just a little bit so we can see our values. So at 3.75%, we're almost at $675,000. Let's try one more example, but this one's even more complex because here's my mortgage amount, my interest rate, my length of the loan, and I want to know what is my monthly payment, what are my total payments, and what is my total interest. So let me shed some light on what's going to happen here. My monthly payment value, how it's going to figure out its value, is using the PMT function. And to have it show up positive, they're sliding in this negative right there. So the PMT function takes the rate, which is 4%, divide by 12 because there's 12 payments in a year. How many number of payments? 360. And what is my present value, which is how much is the loan amount? $250,000. That's my PMT function. So now what's going to happen is, for my data table, what I want to do is figure it out. What is the payment if it's at 3.5%, 3.75, so on and so forth, down to 7% interest. I don't want to have to do each of those calculations by hand. But I also want to figure out total payments. And what is total payments? It is going to be B46, so it's the monthly payments times 360. And I want it to fill in at every single percentage rate. Likewise, with the total interest, which is C46 minus B41, which is take the total payments and subtract it from the original loan amount, and that's how much you pay in interest. But here's the clever part about the data table. As long as I have my function at the top of the column where it's going to be placed, the data table is going to be filled in. So I'm going to highlight this whole entire table. I'm going to go up to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. Again, this is only one variable. I am only changing the interest rate. I am not changing mortgage amount. I am not changing the months, just the interest rate. So this is one variable. The variables, is set up in a column. So it's going to be column input cell. And where is it going? It's going to the interest rate. So each one of these values is going to be substituted in and then spit out an answer by using the function that is above it. So I'm going to say OK. And what's great about it is it filled in the whole entire table for us. So I am going to change these to, just so it looks a little nicer, that it's dollar amounts. Actually, let's do currency. Currency is a nicer one. All right, those were 3 examples of one variable data table. So let's figure out using a 2 variable data table. So this time, not only the months of the loan is changing, but the interest rate is changing as well. And I'm just going to clean up these columns to make them all the same size. So again, the data table needs a function, and the function is going to go right above the first column cell. So above the 60, I'm going to put in the formula. Since it's already on the sheet, I'm going to point to it. Okay, I'll show you what the formula is. It's the payment, PMT, the B10 is the rate. Again, it's divided by 12 because that's monthly payments. B9 is the number of payments, which is 60. B11 is how much was the car loan. Okay. And I wanted to change the number of months and the interest rate. So I'm going to highlight my table, Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. Now we have 2 variables. We have row input, so the row input is up here. Where is that going? That's going into the interest rate. The column input, which are these guys, where is that going into? That's going to be number of months. And I click OK, and payments are negative, so I'm going to format it and currency and make it look negative. Those are our payments amount. So I know If I take out this car loan for $6,300 for 60 months at 4.75%, my payment is going to be $118.17. If I take this loan out of $6,300 at 12 months for 6% interest, it is going to be $542. Now, let's see our second example once again, which was sales projection. Our sales still $650,000. Our growth expected is 2.110%. Our expenses are 9%, and our projected sales is $605,000. So let's see what happens if we manipulate both the growth and our expenses. So again, here's our data table. We have two variables changing. I have a formula of projected sales, which it's B19, so it's sales times the projected growth, the sales plus the sales times the growth minus the sales times the expenses will give us our value. So that's our complicated formula. So since I already have it on my screen or on my sheet, I'm going to just point to it. Again, for my data table to figure out what it's doing, I have to have this formula up here. I could have typed it in, but I'm just going to point to the one that's already on there. I'm going to highlight where my data is. I'm going to go up to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. Again, let's try and figure this out. What is our row input cells? It is the 8%, 8.5, 9. I want to replace the expenses by these values. So the row input would be the expenses. These column amounts are going to be substituted in for the growth. I say okay. Again, these should be dollar amounts, so let's do some formatting just so our data table looks really nice. And I'm going to eliminate the decimal places just because we're dealing with such large numbers. All right, so I know if my growth is projected to be 3% and my expenses are 10%, I'm going to have a projected sales of $604,000, well, and $500. Okay, let's take our third example of our one variable data table and change it into a two variable data table. Now this time I did have to break up the monthly payment, the total payments, and the total interest because it wouldn't have fit on one sole data table. So I am going to input in these functions. So the monthly payment is going to be our negative PMT, our rate divided by 12, our number of payments, 360, and our loan amount. And now I can highlight my table, go to Data, go to Data Table. My row input is going to be my mortgage amount, and my column input is going to be my interest rate. Again, let's format it as dollars because it makes sense to format it as currency with no decimals because decimals are just too big right now. So I know if I take a loan out for $150,000 at 4%, my payment is going to be $760 or $716. Okay, I've already put in the function, which is take this loan amount or the monthly payment amount, multiply it by 360, and that gets me my total payments. So let's fill in the rest of the table. Again, highlight the table, my data, what if analysis, data table. It's getting a lot easier as we're getting practice. Row input cell is going to be our mortgage amount. Our column index is going to be interest rate, and we're going to say OK. Again, let's format it with currency. I'm not worried about the coinage. So I know if I take out a mortgage, if I take out a loan for $150 at 4% interest, my actual total payments is going to be $257,804. And let's figure out the total interest. Total interest is going to be the total payments minus the loan amount. Again, we're going to highlight our data table where it's going to be. Data table, row input. Let's go get it. Click on it. Column index. We know that it is the interest rate. And again, we're going to go to currency. Don't worry about the change. And here we go. Our total interest, if we have a $150,000 loan at 4%, $107,000 is interest. Data tables allow us to see varied results without having to input each of the values into the formula manually. Data tables allow for one variable or two variables. We built several one variable tables, and using similar examples, we built two variable tables as well. Due to input error. Invalid data on Microsoft Excel 2010 Scenario Manager is a tool that can be used to determine different projected outcomes of data by changing different cells within the worksheet model. A scenario is a specific set of values that Excel can save for you and automatically substitute into the worksheet. This means that you can have a worksheet displaying numerical data that is relevant to a certain date, month, topic, or whatever, and using Scenario Manager you can enter different values into the worksheet to forecast the outcome of data. These values, or scenarios, can be retained for future use and are stored in a hidden part of the workbook, which can be retrieved by asking Scenario Manager to show that saved scenario for those specific values. Scenario Manager can also create a summary of those scenarios and display them on a separate automatically built spreadsheet. Because of this feature, it is very wise to name cells used in the scenario so that the Summary Manager will have the names of the cells versus cell addresses, making it more user-friendly. Let's see what this means. Let's say we are a teacher and we have certain grading curves and we want different scenarios of possible grading curves to see how these different grading curves affect the counts of the grades that we're given. I'm going to jump into just building the scenarios. I'm not going to be worrying about naming my cells right now because I want to have you see the difference between unnamed cells versus when we go back and name them, how much easier it will be to understand the scenario. So, on our Data tab, in our What If analysis, let's go to Scenario Manager. And right now, we have no scenarios defined. So, right now we're going to add a scenario, and I'm just going to call this, grading curve 1. And I'm going to change the cells. All of the cells from F4 to F8. And I'm creating it today. I'm going to say, okay. So right now this is kind of my original grading curve, so I'm going to leave the lower range of an F at 0, the low range of D at 20, C at 40, B at 60, and an A at 80. And I'm going to say add because I want to add another scenario. This time we'll say grading curve 2. Again, we're going to change those cells. But this time, I want my values to be, instead of 20, I want 30. We'll say 50, we're being a little bit more generous or less generous, 70, and 90. We'll say add. Again, I want another scenario. We'll call it grading curve 3. And this time I want it to be 0 to, we're being really harsh here, 80 would be a B, and 95 to 100 is an A. Okay, let's call one more grading curve. maybe 2. Grading curve 4, again, changing values. I'm going to change the low range to a 40, to a 60, to a 75, and to an 85. We're going to add one more. We'll do a total of 5. And we're going to go to 60, 70, 80, 90. And I'm going to say, okay. Now I have these different scenarios, and it doesn't seem like it's done much, but I can say, choose grading curve 1, which should be my original data, and I can click on Show. Go to grading curve 2, show my information. You see, it's updated. My lower range is now 30, 50, 70, 90. My grades counts are definitely changed. Grading curve 3, show it. Again, count has changed. Grading curve 4. Well, there we go. C's are dead in the middle. Okay. Now, and let me show you 5. These all work perfectly. They changed the lower range, and because I have some formulas that are dependent on these values, those are all updated as well. I'm going to click on Summary. I'm going to say a scenario summary. My results cell, we'll just say, is 100%. I'm going to say OK. I don't care about the results cell right now. Say OK. Now Excel brings up a brand new spreadsheet. Here's my scenario summary, and I can see here are the current values, the grading curves, and the changing cells. This is what I mean by this is not useful. I have no idea what F4, F5, F6, F7, F8, why are they relevant? To me, they're not. So I'm going to go back to summary, and instead of leaving these as F4, F5, F6, I'm going to name them. So I'm going to say low F and hit enter. I'm just clicking on the cell, going up to the address box and renaming it. Low D. Oops. Low C. Go up to name box. Low B. And low A. Now, if I go back to my summary manager, scenario manager, and I say summary, this time when it creates the summary, I actually get data that is relevant. I know the low value for an F is now zeros across the board. I know the low value for the D is, the current value is 60, and my grading curve is 20, or the grading curve for 1 is a 20, a 30, a 50, a 40, and a 60 across the grading curves. Low for a C is 40, 50, 65, 60, and 70. By naming the changing cells, that gives me more information on my summary to think about later on in life. Now, I didn't care about a result cell this time around, but in the next example, I'll show you the result cell. We're going to build some more scenarios. And again, I want my data to have some names to it, so when I print out the scenario manager summary, that data over there will make some sense. And the fastest way I know how to name cells is if I have some information labels that I'm using for the user, I can apply those to the values in the next column. So all I'm going to do is highlight my column. It's okay if I get some extra names in there, not a big deal. Create from section, and I'm going to say left column. So it's going to grab this name and put it on top of this. So B3 is no longer going to be B3, it's going to be revenue. And likewise with B4, it's going to be units sold, so on and so forth. Oh, I probably have some data in there that it doesn't like, or I have some spaces. So let's take a smaller section and see if it likes my section. Nope. I'm going to have to do it the hard way. So let me go through and name these. Okay, I've gone through and I've named my cells. So instead of B3, it says units sold, price per unit for B5, pardon me, B4, B5. Units produced. I may not need all of these, but I went ahead and just named them. Material cost, manufacturing cost per unit, salaries and benies, advertising expense, administrative expense, miscellaneous expense. Now that I have my cells named, I can start building my scenarios that I want, perhaps having some future ability to forecast what it could be, different scenarios. So I'm going to go to Data, What If Analysis, Scenario Manager, and I don't have any scenarios built right now, so I am going to add one. Let's call this Status Quo, and I am going to change the cells B4 through B5, and let's see, we're going to change B17 through B20. Alrighty, we're going to say OK. So now when I get to my scenario manager, instead of just seeing B4, B5, B17, 18, 19, and 20, I actually see some value there that is understandable, as in human speak. So for units sold, let's say we're going to leave it as is. We're going to leave all the values as they are. So let's add another one. And let's say we expand operations. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to change the units to 30,000. Change the price per unit. Let's make them more expensive. Salaries and benefits. We'll say now our salaries and benefits are more expensive. Our advertising is $30,000. Let's say $50,000. Our administrative, 30. And let's not forget miscellaneous. Let's say that's doubled. And we're going to say add. And let's say another one, scenario manager. Let's see reduction. Reduced operations. I'm going to say OK. And now let's say the units sold are not 24,000. It's 20. Price per unit is down to 22. Salaries and benefit is at 180. Advertising, 20,000. Administrative is 20,000. And miscellaneous is at 15. Okay, and we'll do maybe one more. So this time we'll call it assumption of good sales. I don't know. We can make up anything. We'll say OK. This time units, we'll say 33,000. Price per unit, 20. Salaries and benefit, 175. These are all our scenarios. Administrative goes down. And miscellaneous is OK. Now we have our different scenarios. This is the magic of scenarios. Right now it's on status quo. If I say, okay, what happens if we expand our operations? Then I can say, show me this scenario. And you'll see right now our net income is $56,440. Now if we expand our operations, units sold 30,000 at $27 per unit. Although our expenses went up, our total net income is $105,000. Let's reduce our operations and show that scenario. Units sold $20,000, price per unit 22. We have a net income of negative. And that's the assumption of goods sold. Now we have 33 at $20,000 and a net income of $78,000. And remember how we named those cells? Let's go ahead and do a summary. And we'll say summary of just a regular scenario summary. Our result cell is our net income. And before I do that, I'm actually going to name net income because I did not. We'll say that this is net, oops, my bad, undo, net income, because we want it to show up like that on the summary. Go back to data, what if analysis, scenario manager, and let's do a summary. This time we'll do summary, just a regular summary, say OK. We can see units sold, prices per unit, salaries and benefit, miscellaneous expense, and so forth. We can see the different summaries that we named, and we can see the different net incomes. This is great to show over and over and over. If you had different groups that you had to display this, you could build it once. It does take time to build. It took us a few minutes. We bring out the summary, and we can show it in action. So sometimes this table, okay, that's great, but what did you take into consideration? I can go back to my actual data and run those scenarios, and it would be a perfect match. Let's review what we learned. Scenario Manager can save different sets of data and automatically substitute it into the workbook so it can display different results. We built several different scenarios using 2 different examples, and we named cells to be able to make our scenario summary more user-friendly. If you liked this video, here are more you may want to check out. Until then, I'm Lynn Mann. Be seeing you.